When a compost pile stops moving or a garden bed looks tired no matter how much organic matter you throw at it, there is one hidden truth many gardeners overlook. Sometimes the soil is starved not of food, but of the right biological spark. For years, compost tea has been celebrated as the liquid that wakes up microbes, but there is another liquid, older than modern gardening manuals, that farmers used when their harvests spoiled in storage. They didn't waste it. They poured it back into the soil, and what happened shocked them. The soil turned black, alive, and held moisture like a sponge. That liquid was rotten barley tea. What makes it so strange is this. It isn't the same as compost tea, and it isn't just fermented kitchen scraps. This tea is made from spoiled or soaked grain, barley being the most powerful, though wheat or millet can also be used. On its own it seems like nothing but sour liquid, but when poured into living earth, into soil that hasn't been sterilized or stripped, it triggers a biological chain reaction that builds humus faster than regular compost ever could. Let's break down why this forgotten trick works, how you can replicate it at home, and why it only comes alive when paired with virgin soil. Long before the modern age of fertilizers, farmers depended on what the land gave them. In rural Europe and Asia, especially before the Second World War, grain harvests were life itself. When sacks of barley or wheat went moldy or fermented in damp barns, throwing them away was just unthinkable. Instead, farmers soaked or strained the spoiled grains and poured the liquid into their fields. They noticed something unusual. Where the liquid fell, plants grew greener, the soil smelled sweeter, and earthworms gathered as if pulled by a magnet. They didn't have microscopes to explain what they were seeing, but today we do. That sour liquid was a living fungal starter, loaded with lactobacillus from the fermentation and fungal spores from the moldy grain. When introduced to soil rich in organic matter, it supercharged decomposition and humus formation in ways raw compost alone couldn't achieve. This wasn't just tradition, it was really practical soil science discovered through necessity. Rotten barley tea begins as nothing more than grain and water. When left to soak for several days to weeks, starches in the grain start to break down into sugars. Natural yeasts and lactobacillus bacteria feast on them, producing acids, enzymes, and, well, a sour smell that signals fermentation. If left even longer, molds creep across the surface, weaving filaments that honestly resemble the early stages of fungal growth in soil. What results is a liquid dense with microbial life, enzymes, and partially digested plant compounds. In compost, microbes spend weeks or even months trying to break down tough plant cellulose and lignin. But this tea jumps ahead in the process. It pre-digests nutrients, breaks down carbohydrates, and produces compounds that soil fungi use as fuel. In short, it is not just food, it is an ignition source. Now here is the part that, honestly, confuses a lot of gardeners. If you pour this liquid onto dead or really heavily compacted soil, you're going to see almost nothing happen. The liquid just kind of disappears, leaving barely any trace, and that's because, well, it's not really a fertilizer in the traditional sense. It doesn't actually feed plants directly. Instead, what it does is feed the fungal and microbial networks in the soil that are already there. Virgin soil, meaning ground that still has its natural microbial communities intact, or beds that have not been sterilized with chemicals, is where this trick really shines. When the tea is poured into such soil, the microbes recognize the easy sugars and acids as fuel. They multiply explosively, weaving fungal threads and releasing glues that hold soil particles together. Worms detect the microbial activity and move in to graze, leaving behind castings that further enrich the soil. It is this interaction, microbes, fungi, worms, and organic matter, that creates humus quickly. Rotten barley tea is the spark, but virgin soil is the firewood. The process is, honestly, deceptively simple. A jar, bucket, or even a cloth sack of barley soaked in water will eventually ferment if you just leave it at room temperature. Within about a week, you'll start to notice the sour notes of lactic fermentation. After about 2 weeks, the liquid darkens and sometimes you'll see foamy bubbles. By 3 weeks, a thin fungal skin might even form on top. At this stage, the liquid is ready. Now just strain it off, dilute it with a few parts water if it smells too sharp, and pour it directly into compost piles or garden soil that already has organic material present. You really don't need much. Even just a few cups per square foot can awaken microbial life across an entire bed. If barley is hard to find, wheat, millet, or even rice can be used. The principle remains the same. Any grain that ferments becomes food for microbes. Barley, however, contains specific compounds that fungi particularly thrive on, which is why it is the traditional choice. The first sign that it is working is, well, the smell. Soil treated with rotten barley tea begins to lose any sour or stagnant odor and takes on the rich, earthy scent of humus. Digging just a few inches reveals threads of fungal mycelium spreading across organic matter. Worms soon appear, their castings dotting the surface. Plants benefit indirectly. They don't absorb much from the tea itself, but they thrive in the humus-rich soil that follows. Leaves green up, water retention improves, and roots push deeper into the loosened, structured ground. Unlike chemical fertilizers that spike growth and then fade, this method builds a permanent improvement in soil biology. Once the fungi establish, they continue their work, breaking down organic material long after the tea is gone. Traditional composting relies on bacteria and fungi slowly breaking down material over time. It is effective but often slow, especially in cooler weather or when piles dry out. Rotten barley tea accelerates the process because it comes preloaded with active microbes and partially digested nutrients. When introduced to a compost pile, it can take a stalled or sluggish heap and restart decomposition in just a few days. In soil, it acts the same way. Instead of waiting months for organic matter to slowly transform, the tea creates conditions for fungi to leap ahead, forming humus in weeks rather than seasons. It is not a replacement for compost, it is the accelerator that makes compost truly come alive. It is remarkable that something so simple has nearly vanished from memory. You know, pre-World War II farmers leaned on tricks like this, not because they were mystical, but because they actually worked. These days, with shelves full of synthetic fertilizers and all sorts of bottled solutions, a lot of gardeners kind of forget that the answers often lie in processes nature already perfected. Rotten barley tea is honestly one of those processes. It costs almost nothing, takes very little effort, and produces results that, well, no store-bought fertilizer can really replicate. But more importantly, it connects us to a lineage of growers who understood soil as a living community, not just dirt to be fed with chemicals. If your compost pile stalls, if your soil seems lifeless, or if you want humus to form faster, this forgotten liquid could be the missing key. But remember the crucial rule: it only works when poured into soil that already has life. Virgin soil, even if it's, kind of poor, contains the microbial foundation necessary for the reaction. Feed it with rotten barley tea, and honestly, the transformation can be pretty dramatic. For gardeners seeking not just quick fixes but lasting soil health, this method is a reminder that sometimes the smallest, simplest interventions produce the greatest results. Rotten barley tea may not appear in modern gardening manuals, but it really deserves to return. It is proof that forgotten traditions often hide the most powerful solutions. If you found this guide helpful and want more hidden soil revival methods revealed, Make sure to subscribe to Hydrohaven and share this with fellow gardeners who care about bringing their soil back to life. The past holds many secrets, and together we can make them bloom again.